All right, welcome to the Isaiah Thomas Print Shop. I'm Isaiah Thomas, proprietor. Today we're talking about a particular one of the British broadsides. What's a broadside, you ask? A broadside is a document that's printed on only one side of the paper. It is meant to be posted in a public place so that it can be read. This is what we're going to talk about, but let's look first at a normal broadside. The broadside, that's an official proclamation, typically starts, well, almost always starts the same way. It has the crest of the reigning monarch. So here we have the lion and the unicorn of England and Scotland, the rose and the thistle, and then GR, which is the Latin way that we say King George, Georgius Rex. We then have the text of the proclamation, and it ends at the bottom with God Save the King. And so the one that we're going to look at here is from November 1775. It is done by Governor Dunmore, the governor of Virginia, and we'll see at the bottom it says God Save the King, just as it should. But why is it missing the crest here at the top? It's an interesting question. So let me first talk about what this one does, and we'll talk about the context that it was done in. So this is now as Governor Dunmore is losing control over the colony. You might be surprised to find out that Governor Dunmore was a very popular governor. Only a year prior to this, we would hold the parades for Governor Dunmore in the street because he was so popular. Now, perhaps you've heard that in most other places where we had statues of official people, whether it's King George or other governors, during the Revolutionary War, they are torn down. In fact, the one in New York of King George was melted down. The lead was used to make bullets to support the war effort. But the statue of Governor Dunmore is never molested throughout the whole war. In fact, from time to time, the local citizens of Williamsburg will go and clean it because he is seen as a good man who was on the wrong side of the question. And so here, though, just as he's losing control in the colony, he's saying, I have to make one final effort to be able to control what's happening here. And so in this proclamation, he declares martial law. So he says the laws will be enforced by the military. But then he goes on to make a very controversial move. He also is going to grant freedom to the slaves, but not to all the slaves. Only the slaves that are owned by rebels, and only the slaves that are able and willing to bear arms and fight for the king. And so that's this particular proclamation. So the question is, how come the crest isn't here on the top? And the answer is, by this time, Governor Dunmore has already fled Williamsburg, and he is now on the ship William in the more than the James River, and it's a warship, but he has now already left. And so when he left, he neglected to collect the crest to be able to print. And so he just doesn't have it to be able to print. So although this is an official proclamation made by the governor, it lacks legitimacy because the crest is just missing. And so when we see it, we think there's something wrong here, and it was just an oversight when he was fleeing from the royal or from the governor's mansion. He neglected to collect the crest. Very, very controversial. And if there was anything that we had some planters or some plantation owners who were wondering, should we side with the British or the Americans, this pushed them over the edge, because this was the biggest fear of plantation owners, was the slave rebellion or the uprising. And here Governor Dunmore has encouraged that to happen. Now, of the several slaves who would take Governor Dunmore up on his offer, who could make their way to the British lines, Governor Dunmore honored his promise to grant freedom to them. And so they did earn their freedom. In some cases, they even brought their families, and even though the document itself doesn't offer freedom to their families, Governor Dunmore granted their families freedom as well if they came and fought. They ended up having to leave America, and most of them went back to England after the war. That's the official proclamation freeing the slaves.